Welcome to the Deep Dive, your express pass to understanding some really pivotal moments in history. Today, we're immersing ourselves in the historical era spanning roughly 1790 to 1860. Our sources frame these 70 years as a ferment of reform and culture. Think of it as a kind of third revolution in American life.
Yeah, not political or economic. This one was more about, well, trying to improve the character of ordinary Americans, making them more moral, more educated. Our mission today is to give you a shortcut through this complex time. We want to unpack how this religious fire kicked off a whole wave of social movements, everything from women's rights to temperance, and even the birth of uniquely American art.
That's right. And it's crucial to get a handle on the driving forces here. You've got these expanding democratic ideals, this belief in the individual, but it was also, a pushback against the earlier rationalism, things like deism.
Deism, that's the clockmaker God idea, right? God sets it up and steps back. Exactly. And figures like Thomas Paine, with the Age of Reason, were part of that rationalist wave. This new ferment was, in part, a reaction against that colder view. Plus, you have the massive changes from the market revolution just churning society up.
Yeah.
People moving, new jobs, new pressures. It created this environment where reformers felt compelled to act.
And act they did.
Oh, absolutely. The sheer number of reform efforts is kind of staggering. Campaigns against alcohol, tobacco, swearing, efforts for better schools, prisons, even these experimental utopian communities popping up. A real drive for perfection.
Okay, so that moral perfection angle, it really starts with religion, doesn't it? Let's dive into the Second Great Awakening.
It really does. The Second Great Awakening, or SGA, was just this huge tidal wave of spiritual energy, way bigger than the First Great Awakening, reached far more people. And what's fascinating is the shift in theology. Forget the old stern Calvinist ideas of predestination. The SGA pushed a much more optimistic democratic message. Salvation's open to everyone through faith and good works. Humans are basically good, capable of improvement.
Right. Less doom, more hope. And the methods they used, pretty dramatic.
Extremely. You have these massive camp meetings, gatherings of maybe up to 25,000 people, lasting for days.
Wow.
Yeah, and intense emotional experiences were central. The sources describe people rolling, dancing, shouting, jerking. This physical expression of religious fervor was common.
And this helped certain denominations grow.
Definitely. The Methodists and Baptists exploded in popularity. Their emphasis on personal conversion, on emotion, and their more democratic church structure really resonated with ordinary people, especially on the frontier.
You mentioned figures like Peter Cartwright, the sit writer. He sounds like a character.
Oh, he was a classic frontier preacher. Very muscular, very direct.
Yeah.
The sources say he wasn't afraid to use his fists to deal with people trying to disrupt his meetings. Sermon and strength combined.
Amazing. But maybe the most influential preacher was Charles Grandison Finney. He seems like a real innovator.
Absolutely. Finney was probably the greatest revival preacher of the whole era. He'd been a lawyer, and he brought this sort of strategic thinking to revivalism.
How so?
Well, he developed techniques like the anxious bench.
Ah, yes, the anxious bench.
Right, where people considering conversion would sit right up front in full view of the congregation. Talk about pressure. He also encouraged women to pray aloud in public meetings.
That sounds incredibly radical for the 1830s, allowing women a public voice like that.
It was hugely significant. It tied into this idea that women had a special spiritual role. And Finney didn't just focus on saving souls, he linked it directly to fixing society. He powerfully denounced alcohol and slavery.
Okay, so if you're truly converted, you have to fight these evils.
That was his message. Spiritual change demands social action.
And this brings us squarely to the role of women. They were the majority of converts, weren't they?
Overwhelmingly. They were the earliest and most enthusiastic participants. This evangelical message emphasized female spiritual worth, giving them a sense of purpose and, crucially, a justification for moving outside the home.
Into reform movements.
Exactly. Prison reform, temperance, abolition, eventually the women's movement itself. It all connects back to this religious awakening, giving women a perceived moral authority and a network.
This religious intensity wasn't spread evenly, though. You get hot spots, like the Burned-Over district in western New York.
Right, so named because it was just scorched by sermon after sermon, preacher after preacher. It became this real hotbed for new, sometimes radical religious ideas.
Like the Millerites.
Ah, yes, the Millerites, who became the Adventists. They followed William Miller's prediction that Christ would return on a specific date, October 22, 1844.
Which didn't happen.
Which didn't happen. But it shows you the incredible fervor and literalism of the time. People sold possessions, gathered on hillsides. The disappointment was immense. but the movement adapted and survived.
And this religious ferment didn't just create new sects, it also deepened existing divides, right? Class and region.
Very much so. Generally, wealthier, more established urban communities tended to stick with older, more conservative denominations. Episcopalians, Presbyterians, maybe Unitarians.
While the Baptists and Methodists drew more from less prosperous rural and frontier communities.
Exactly.
Split.
And the biggest split, the most ominous one, was over slavery. By 1844, 1845, both the Methodists and the Baptists formally split into northern and southern branches over the slavery issue.
The churches split before the nation did.
A powerful foreshadowing, absolutely.
Okay, also emerging from that burned-over district energy, probably the most distinctive American-born religion, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons.
Founded by Joseph Smith in 1830. He reported discovering golden plates, which he translated as the Book of Mormon. From the start, they faced intense hostility.
Why so much antagonism?
Several reasons. Their cooperative structure critics called it an oligarchy, clashed with American individualism. They voted as a bloc, which worried politicians. They drilled the militia, raising fears. And of course, there were rumors, and later, the open practice of polygamy.
Joseph Smith reportedly had several wives.
Yes. All this friction led to violence. Smith and his brother were tragically murdered by a mob in Carthage, Illinois in 1844.
It looked like the end for the movement.
It could have been. But Brigham Young stepped up. A really remarkable leader, apparently only had 11 days of formal schooling, but he was incredibly organized and determined.
And he led the Mormons west.
He led the famous arduous trek in 1846-47 to the Great Salt Lake Valley in Utah, their desert Zion. They built a thriving, irrigated community through incredible discipline and cooperation.
But the conflict with the outside didn't end there.
No. Tensions with the federal government continued, leading to the near-miss Utah War in 1857, and polygamy remained a huge sticking point. The Republican platform in 1856 actually condemned slavery and polygamy together as the twin relics of barbarism.
Wow. So Utah didn't become a state until much later.
Not until 1896, after the church officially renounced polygamy.
Okay, so this intense religious energy is fueling all sorts of things. Let's track how it spills over into broader social reform. This optimism, this belief in perfectibility, it inspires people to tackle earthly problems. Education seems like a key area.
Huge focus on education. Between roughly 1825 and 1850, tax-supported public primary schools really started to take hold.
Why then?
Well, a couple of key drivers. Working-class families were demanding education for their children. As suffrage expanded, if more men could vote, they needed to be informed voters.
Makes sense.
And the wealthier classes saw it as a kind of social insurance.
Yeah.
Educate the masses, instill virtues, prevent social unrest from an ignorant populace.
After Horace Mann.
Right. Horace Mann in Massachusetts was a tireless champion. He campaigned relentlessly for more and better schoolhouses, longer school terms, higher pay for teachers, and expanded curriculum. His efforts really set a standard.
And we also get figures standardizing the American language itself, like Noah Webster with his dictionary in 1828.
And William H. McGuffey, whose McGuffey's readers sold, over 120 million copies?
Incredible number.
Yeah, and they hammered home lessons in morality, patriotism, hard work, shaping the values of generations.
Now, what about education for women? Still lagging behind.
Significantly.
Yeah.
The prevailing attitude was still that too much learning was bad for women, maybe even physically harmful. But pioneers pushed back.
Like Emma Willard.
Emma Willard founded the Troy Female Seminary in New York in 1821. And Mary Lyon established Mount Holyoke Seminary, later college in Massachusetts, in 1837. These were crucial steps for women's higher education.
And Oberlin College in Ohio, they did something pretty radical.
Extremely radical for 1837. They opened their doors not only to women, but also to black students. Truly groundbreaking.
Beyond schools, what about other humanitarian reforms?
Well, there was progress in legal reform. States gradually abolished imprisonment for debt.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. And criminal codes were softened, reducing the number of capital offenses. The focus in prisons began to shift, at least in theory, from pure punishment towards reform, hence the term penitentiary.
But the standout figure here seems to be Dorothea Dix.
Absolutely monumental work. She undertook this grueling, years-long investigation, traveling 60,000 miles across the country.
60,000 miles?
Documenting the absolutely horrific conditions faced by people with mental illness, often chained, kept in cages or stalls, alongside criminals in filth.
Just appalling.
Her detailed, damning report to the Massachusetts legislature in 1843 was a bombshell. It forced people to see that the insane weren't willfully perverse. They were mentally ill and needed compassionate care and treatment. Her work led directly to improved conditions and the creation of dedicated mental hospitals.
A truly incredible reformer. Okay, so schools, prisons, mental health. What about social vices? Alcohol seems like a big target.
Huge. Demon rum was seen as a major social ill. Heavy drinking was incredibly common, impacting work safety and efficiency, leading to accidents and devastating families.
So the temperance movement gets going.
Kicks off seriously with the American Temperance Society in 1826. They used moral suasion, urging people to sign pledges to abstain from alcohol. Kids were even organized into the Cold-Water Army.
And literature played a role, too.
Oh, definitely. T.S. Arthur's novel 10 Nights in a Barroom and What I Saw There, published in 1854, was a runaway bestseller, second only to Uncle Tom's Cabin in the 1850s, apparently. It depicted the ruinous effects of alcohol in really melodramatic terms.
Did the movement push for legal bans?
It started to split. Some advocated temperance moderation while others pushed for total prohibition. Neil S. Dow, the father of prohibition, was key here.
From Maine.
Yep. He sponsored the Maine Law of 1851, which prohibited the manufacture and sale of intoxicating liquor. Other states followed, but enforcement was tough, and many of these laws were later repealed or weakened. Still, the movement did arguably reduce overall alcohol consumption.
Okay, another major reform wave fueled by this era's energy, women's rights. We touched on women's role in religion, but what was their legal status like in the early 1800s?
Pretty grim, legally speaking. America was very much a man's world. A married woman typically couldn't vote, couldn't own property in her own name, it passed to her husband. And yes, the law in some places allowed a husband to physically discipline his wife.
So this idea of the cult of domesticity, women being morally superior, ruling the home sphere, that wasn't equality.
Not at all. While it glorified women's role in the home, many reformers saw it as a gilded cage, limiting their potential and their rights in the public sphere. But that same moral superiority argument became a lever for change.
How so?
Women argued that society needed their moral influence outside the home to tackle problems like slavery and drunkenness. Reform work became their entry point into public life.
And specific leaders emerged, the Susie B's, as the source calls them.
Right, that refers to Susan B. Anthony, a truly tireless and militant lecturer for women's rights. But she worked alongside others. Lucretia Mott, a Quaker, was outraged when she and other female delegates were refused seating at the 1840 World Anti-Slavery Convention in London.
That lit a fire.
It certainly did. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who advocated for suffrage early on and famously omitted the word obey from her marriage ceremony.
Bold move for the time.
Very. We should also mention Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman to graduate from medical school, the Grimke sisters, Sarah and Angelina, who are powerful abolitionist speakers, Lucy Stone, who kept her maiden name after marriage and other radical acts, and Amelia Bloomer.
Ah, the Bloomers.
Yes, advocating for dress reform with a shorter skirt and Turkish-style trousers. It seems trivial now, maybe, but challenging restrictive fashion was part of challenging broader limitations on women.
So where does this all come together?
The crucial turning point is the Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls, New York in 1848, organized primarily by Stanton and Mott.
And Stanton read her Declaration of Sentiments.
Yes, deliberately modeled on the Declaration of Independence. It declared all men and women are created equal and listed grievances against male domination.
And the most controversial part.
The resolution demanding the right to vote for women. It passed, but narrowly. Even many supporters thought it was too radical at the time. But Seneca Falls marks the formal launch of the modern women's rights movement in America. Despite facing ridicule, it set the agenda for decades to come.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Besides trying to reform existing society, some people trying to create entirely new, perfect societies, these utopian communities.
Right, another expression of that perfectionist impulse. Dozens of these communities sprang up, though most were pretty short-lived.
Like Robert Owen's New Harmony.
Yeah, founded in Indiana in 1825. Owen was a wealthy idealist, but his community attracted a mix of radicals, theorists, and apparently some scoundrels. It collapsed in confusion and contradiction within about 2 years.
And Brook Farm in Massachusetts.
That was the Transcendentalist experiment, started in 1841, committed to balancing intellectual life with manual labor, plain living, and high sinking. But it struggled financially, and a major fire eventually doomed it.
What about the Shakers? They lasted longer.
Much longer. Founded by Mother Ann Lee back in the 1770s, they peaked around 1840 with maybe 6,000 members. They were known for their simple, functional, furniture and crafts, and their ecstatic religious dances.
But there are rules about personal relationships.
Yeah, they prohibited both marriage and sexual relations, which naturally meant they relied entirely on new converts for growth. So over time, they dwindled and are virtually extinct today.
Okay, then there's the Oneida Community. This one sounds unique.
Definitely the most radical in terms of social arrangements. Founded by John Humphrey Noyes in 1848 in New York. Noyes believed humans could achieve perfect Christian community on earth, free from sin and selfishness.
And its solution involved complex marriage.
Yes. Which was essentially a carefully regulated form of free love or communal marriage within the community. No exclusive attachments. They also practiced birth control, which they called male continence, and even a form of eugenics, selecting parents to produce superior offspring.
Wow. How did that survive?
Well, partly through isolation, partly through sheer economic success, they became brilliant manufacturers, especially of high-quality steel traps and silverware. That financial stability helped them endure for over 30 years.
But the outside pressure eventually got to them.
It did. Facing intense criticism, they gave up complex marriage in 1879 and eventually reorganized as a conventional joint stock company, famous for making silverware. A very strange journey from utopian experiment to capitalist enterprise.
Okay, so alongside perfecting society and morals, Americans were also trying to create a distinct national culture, breaking free from Europe in arts and letters.
Yes, a push for cultural independence to match the political independence. You see it in architecture first. There's the practical, restrained federal style, and then the big Greek revival phase from about 1820 to 1850. Lots of columns, very imposing. Thomas Jefferson was a key architectural influence with his classical designs like Monticello.
What about painting?
It developed more slowly, partly due to lingering Puritan suspicion of visual arts. But you get important portrait painters like Gilbert Stuart, famous for his images of Washington.
And a Hudson River school.
Right, emerging in the 1820s and 30s. These artists, like Thomas Cole, focused on painting American landscapes, emphasizing the grandeur, the wildness, the sublimity of nature. Think of Cole's painting the Oxbow. It captures that awe-inspiring, untamed quality.
And literature really takes off after 1820.
It does, coinciding with the rise of Romanticism across the Atlantic that focus on imagination, intuition, nature, the individual, emotion over pure reason.
We get the Knickerbocker Group in New York.
Right. Washington Irving is key here. He's really the first American author to gain international fame, with the sketchbook containing classics like Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. He proved Americans could write engagingly.
And James Fenimore Cooper.
Cooper used distinctively American themes and settings, especially the frontier. The Last of the Mohicans is his most famous. He explored that contrast between the natural men of the wilderness and the complexities or corruptions of civilization.
William Cullen Bryant, too.
Yes, wrote the acclaimed poem Thanatopsis when he was just 16, and later became the influential editor of the New York Evening Post. So New York had this early literary burst.
But the real intellectual center was New England, especially with Transcendentalism.
Definitely. Transcendentalism, emerging in the 1830s, was less a formal system and more a way of thinking. It rejected the Enlightenment idea that all knowledge comes through the senses, empiricism.
So truth transcends the senses.
Exactly. Truth comes from within, through intuition, through connection with the oversoul, or God, that pervades all things. It emphasized individualism, self-reliance, self-culture. This philosophy directly fueled many of the reform movements we've discussed.
And the main figure here is Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Emerson was the leading voice. His essays and lectures were hugely influential. His 1837 address, The American Scholar, delivered at Harvard, was essentially a call for American intellectual independence. Stop imitating Europe, he urged. Draw inspiration from American life.
And his friend and neighbor, Henry David Thoreau.
Thoreau put transcendentalist ideals into practice. Famously lived simply at Walden Pond for 2 years. He was a fierce nonconformist, even going to jail briefly for refusing to pay a poll tax, supporting the Mexican-American War, which he saw as pro-slavery.
And his writings, Walden and Civil Disobedience.
Hugely influential later on. Civil Disobedience, his essay on nonviolent resistance to unjust laws, inspired figures like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., a profound legacy.
We should also mention Margaret Fuller in this circle.
Yes, a brilliant intellectual, editor of the Transcendentalist journal The Dial. Her book, Woman in the 19th Century, 1845, was a powerful early statement of feminist ideas, pushing for women's intellectual and social equality.
And then there's Walt Whitman, very different style.
Oh, completely. Whitman, based in Brooklyn, was bold, sprawling, unconventional. His collection Leaves of Grass, first published in 1855 and revised throughout his life, celebrated America, its democracy, its energy, its diversity.
Using free verse, that barbaric yop.
Exactly. He rejected traditional poetic forms and celebrated the self, the body, the common person, the sensuous world. He's seen as this quintessentially American poet of expansion and democracy.
But not all American writers shared that optimism, did they? There were darker voices.
That's a crucial point. Alongside the transcendentalist optimism, you have writers exploring sin, guilt, madness, limits of reason. Edgar Allan Poe, for instance.
Master of the Gothic.
Yes, brilliant poet, but also famous for his chilling short stories like The Fall of the House of Usher, obsessed with psychological extremes, death, decay, the irrational, a stark contrast to Emerson's sunny outlook.
And Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Hawthorne was deeply interested in the legacy of Puritanism, in sin, guilt, and hidden secrets. The Scarlet Letter, 1850, is his masterpiece, exploring the psychological consequences of adultery and social judgment in colonial New England.
Finally, Herman Melville.
Melville drew on his own experiences at sea. His epic novel, Moby Dick, 1851, is far more than just a whaling story. Captain Ahab's obsessive monomaniacal quest for the white whale becomes this complex allegory about good, evil, obsession, maybe the struggle against an indifferent or even hostile universe.
It wasn't recognized as a classic initially.
No, it was largely ignored or misunderstood in its time. Too dark, too complex for an audience, perhaps more attuned to optimism or sentimentality. Its reputation grew massively in the 20th century.
So, wrapping this incredible period up, what's the big picture? We start with this religious fire, the Second Great Awakening.
Right, and that fire ignites a whole generation dedicated to perfecting themselves and their society. Morals, education, institutions like prisons and asylums with figures like Mann and Dix, then pushing for rights with Stanton and Anthony, even creating new societies like the Shakers or Oneida.
And alongside that, a drive to create a truly American culture in art, architecture, and especially literature, from Irving and Cooper to the Transcendentalists like Emerson and Thoreau, and the darker visions of Poe, Hawthorne, and Melville.
So what does this all mean for you? Try to understand this era. The sources really lay out this powerful tension in the American character. There's this intense, often religiously fueled desire for reform, for improvement, for perfection.
Running right up against resistance. Resistance from established ways of doing things, from tradition, from entrenched power structures, whether it's the family, the church, economic interests, or the massive institution of slavery looming over everything.
And here's something provocative to consider as you think about this material. Historians have debated the motives of these reformers. Were they purely altruistic idealists, driven by genuine concern for humanity?
Or was there an element of social control? Were some reforms, maybe like public education emphasizing discipline, or temperance targeting immigrant drinking cultures, were these partly efforts by an established middle or upper class to manage a society that felt increasingly chaotic and diverse?
When you look at all the evidence presented in the sources, the passion of Dorothea Dix, the radicalism of Seneca Falls, but also the strict rules of McGuffey's readers, or the aims of some temperance advocates, which interpretation seems more compelling to you? Or is it a mix of both, something to chew on?
We certainly hope this deep dive into the ferment of reform and culture has given you some clarity and context for this absolutely pivotal time in American history.
It was a period that truly shaped the nation we know today.
Thank you for joining us.